Hey everybody, welcome back to Board and Savior. Has this ever happened to you? Your friend comes over, maybe 2 friends, if you're, fancy. Maybe 3. Oh, look at you, I've got 3 friends. Sorry, I'm projecting. But one of those friends says, that game on your shelf, can we play that one tonight? And you go, we could. It's a good game, but it takes like 45 minutes to set up. I know it's happened to you. It's happened to me. It happens to me on the regular. A game that you know is solid, but it just takes too long to set up and you're not really feeling that. I feel like that's maybe one of the biggest barriers to these wonderful things. If it's not rules, it's setup, because sometimes you just don't want to deal with that. So what I have done for you is I have curated a list of the 5 games with the absolute best setup, just for your eyeballs and your earballs. And there's no smell, there's no taste, there's no touch. Yeah, just eyeballs and earballs. I have curated a list of the best setup board games that there are. What does that mean? We're talking about easy setup, so you open up a box and you're kind of just playing the game, or fun setup, where as you are setting up the game, you're already kind of playing the game. That's these 5 games. They make setup less of a chore and more of a score. You could see me like finding that. It wasn't great, but we got there. Let's find out what these games are. Okay, before we talk about good, I want to talk about bad. But before we talk about bad, I want to talk really quick about how, if you look in the description down below, there's 2 links for you to be aware of. One is to a Ko-Fi page. What is that? It's like Patreon, but in addition to monthly subscription things that you are allowed to do, I will be happy to accept that. You can also do like one-time donations if monthly subscriptions, it's not your thing. That's down there, but importantly, the other link is to another Board and Savior video that went up today that you can watch after this video when you're like, man, I wish that guy could talk to me some more. I did. Watch the other one, and that'll explain kind of why I'm doing this Ko-Fi thing. I lost my job. That's too bad. But yeah, you can watch that stuff, figure out if it's right for you to donate. You can also just watch the stuff. I'm very happy to have you watching this stuff. But if you like this and you want to give money, you're welcome to do that. So that's down there. Okay, let's talk about bad setup real quick before we talk about good setup. And we're not just talking about games that are tedious to set up. There's a lot of those. Most board games have that to some extent. I have a very specific grievance that I want to air to you, and that is the Gloomhavens of the world, the Imperial Assaults of the world, Death May Die, any game that has map tiles that are different sizes and therefore are pretty tough to organize, so you kind of just chuck them in the box, and then when you play a new scenario, it says find tile 5A and 7B and 19C, and there's 3 19Cs that you need, and you can only find 2 of them. It's just a nightmare, right? Like, if you've ever had to set that up, it sucks. I'm going to say 2 good versions, which are not on the actual list proper, but Undaunted, which has the square map tiles that also do like the 19A, 19B thing, but because they're square, you can just put them in numerical order, which is much, much easier. And then Gloomhaven learned their lesson for Jaws of the Lion, and they made a map book that you open up to a map that is there in a book, and you don't have to do any building. You just, as long as you can open a book, you're set. So that's the good version. I just wanted to say, like, man, I've been playing a lot of Imperial Assault lately. That part sucks. It's just not a good time needing to build a map, especially if you are like, you play a game and your friend is like, well, we got to play that again. And then you go, okay, give me a second. We got to build a map together, friend. And then you kind of can't have them build a map with you if you're playing like the bad guy, because the Empire players it doesn't matter. You don't need all that stuff. That's the bad. I just wanted to complain real quick before we jump into the good stuff. So let's see the good stuff.
Ever gonna wake him up? If I did, do you think they'd be any different?
This is Eclipse, Second Dawn for the Galaxy, the second edition of Eclipse, New Dawn for the Galaxy. But why the heck would I play that piece of garbage game when this exists? No, Eclipse, New Dawn for the Galaxy isn't garbage. People still like it, but, I mean, come on. Let's talk setup. Obviously, I just did it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be set up. So I have first-hand experience, like really recently, with setting up this game. First things first, this is a big, fairly sprawling space game with tech trees, upgrades, lots of miniatures that you go around and you shoot at, you've got your own unique player ships and miniatures. It's a game that, on its face, if you were to see this set up mid-gameplay, you would think, that probably took a hot second to set up. I just did it. It took 10 to 15 minutes. It was probably like 12 minutes to set this thing up. For a game of this scale, it doesn't really get better than that. And this is like the biggest game that we'll be talking about today. And so it does kind of take the longest to set up of any game that I'm going to talk about today, and it takes like 15 minutes. That's pretty good. How does it manage that? First of all, you build the board as you play, and I think that's really big. You don't have to do the whole thing of shuffling up tiles and putting them out and getting them in the right spot. You put out a central tile with the big bad thing. You put out the player tiles on either side, or if it's a 3-player game, on the 3, or if it's 4, whatever, and then some neutral tiles with some enemy ships, and then you're done building the board as you need to set up the game. Everything else is going to happen in gameplay, and it gamifies the setup of like putting together the board. So that's great. The board part isn't annoying. Love that. Second thing here for you is this tray of tech. These are the things that all the players can research. How do you set this up? Well, it's a different number of tech tiles that you'll put out depending on how many players you've got. For 2 players, you put out 12 tiles. What you do, you reach into this bag and you draw tiles until you've drawn 12 of them. No, that's not like a whole game in and of itself, but I don't know, am I a freak for loving pulling things out of bags? They made part of the setup just kind of like a fun thing to do. This big thing over here with all of the ship upgrades, pop open the top, it's done. That thing is set up. Once you've done like the token punching setup thing that you have to do for every board game, that's set up for the rest of time. That's amazing. This is the box with all of the enemy ships and neutral like buildings. You open the top of this, it is set up and ready to use. These, I guess, are the only thing that has like any amount of annoying, tedious setup. You just have to like pull these out of the box and like put them together in stacks. It's not too bad. I did it pretty quickly. And then for the players, they have these lovely player boxes that all you got to do, open it up, you take out these little lovely discs, set them up on the board. That does take like 30-40 seconds. So, you know, if you don't want 30-40 seconds of setup, this is the wrong game for you. And then everything else is in the thing, organized. You've got all your unique ships. You've got your little cubes in this area over here. You pull out a couple cubes, put them into this tray that tracks the resources that you've got. You've got these little things that kind of track your income, and you are done setting up the game. It really is that simple. And it's a big game. It's a game with a lot of unique ideas and moving pieces and combat with ships that are asymmetric because you've built them in different ways. And that's all the setup that you have to do. Am I crazy to think that this might be the most efficient setup to amount of gameplay ratio that there is? Do you have one that's better? Let me know in the comments. This is Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy. They broke the mold. This is Wildlands, a game that if you're a Board and Savior fan, you know that I hadn't played this game until very recently. This was one of the games that was on my 30 games that I have to play this year that I've owned for a while and just haven't played. Now I've played it, and it's because I've played it that I know that the setup in this game, ooh, spicy Papa Meatball boy, I like it. So this, what you're looking at right now, this empty board and a couple of characters set out on cards and a couple of decks. This is the setup that you have to do before you start playing the game. This takes, I don't know, I just did it 7-8 minutes. You shuffle up decks of cards for the players. You know, if you're with the other players and you're not doing like a pre-people coming over setup, they can just shuffle their own decks of cards. So you've got to shuffle your deck of cards. You have to set out miniatures on these cards. It takes 2 seconds. Put some gems on the table, and then shuffle one common deck of number cards, which we'll talk about in a second. That's the non-fun setup. It's super, super quick. And this is like a board game looking board game, you know? It's not a little dinky box. It's a real thing. Once you have done that, the game begins, and the next step of setup is the first part of the game. And it's a pretty sizable part of the game. Maybe like a third of the gameplay is deciding on this starting setup, and it's a fun little puzzle. What you get is 10 of these numbered cards, numbers that match the spaces on this board. Every player gets 10 of these cards, and what you do is you secretly assign 5 of these cards to your heroes, to these characters that you are having move around the board. You secretly assign 5 of these cards to those characters, and then when it is your turn, you will reveal at least one of these characters and say, all right, my boy Garen is popping up on space 6, which is here. That is, all of these cards are the starting locations of your characters. But what about the other 5 cards? Well, the other 5 cards you will pass to your neighbor, and these will be the spaces that your neighbor's gems pop up on the board on. Victory condition in this game is to collect 5 of something, either your color gems or opposing miniatures that you have defeated in combat. If you collect 5 in any combination, 3 of your gems, 2 of their characters, you win the game. So by choosing which spaces your characters are going on, you're choosing which spaces your gems are or which spaces your opponent's gems are going on with these other cards. So I now know that these yellow gems are going on spaces 24, 11, 22, 17, and 9. And so what you do when you're doing that setup is you are figuring out where you want your characters to be in relation to the opposing gems. You're also figuring out where you want your characters to be in relation to wherever your opponent is going to put your gems. So you kind of want to spread yourself out around the board a little bit, but maybe you put a couple of your opponent's gems in one corner and you have a couple of your characters in that corner. You know that if your opponent wants to grab those gems, they've got to go through Lunk, this big honking boy, and he is gonna punch you in the head. So it's a really fun little, like, in addition to just doing some of like the setup work in a gameplay fashion, it's a good part of the strategy. The game itself is playing cards that allow you to move and take a couple of different actions with the characters, and these are all slightly varied factions. Like, this is a more magic-based faction, so you've got more area of attack. You don't have like arrows being launched, and for the most part, these people aren't very good at melee combat, with the exception of Lunk, who is maybe like a bodyguard that they have hired to do the like brute force stuff. And then meanwhile, these are more melee combat focused guys. These little gnomes, I haven't played with them, so I don't know, but they're gnomes. But that's kind of the idea. Is each faction is slightly different, slightly varied, and their decks do different things, but that setup is a big part of the game and is a really fun and unique way to make setup enjoyable as opposed to just rote and following a rule book. So this is Wildlands, a new game to me, but one that is definitely sticking around. Okay, is this a board game? No, I can't really make the argument that it is. This is a miniatures game through and through. You gotta build the miniatures. You should paint them. I mean, the stuff that's painted on this table looks a lot better than the stuff that's unpainted, undeniably. But it's here because, you know, you could buy it at a board game store. It comes in a board game sized box. You only need to buy the one core box technically to play the game. You do also need to like get glue and little clippers to put together the miniatures, which I recognize might be annoying. But if you're good with that, This is a game, a tabletop game, that has a very enjoyable setup to me. This and Star Wars Legion are the two kind of like miniatures games that I have gotten into, and it is not because I care almost at all about the competitive aspect. I am not bringing this to a tournament and playing my optimized team against your optimized team. No, I kind of personally hate that. I only want this for thematic teams versus thematic teams. I've got a team of kind of Sinister Six spider foes against more Avengers kind of heroes here, and that is every single game that I play of this, every game that I play of Legion. It is thematic teams that make sense together, and the reason that I like the game of it is because of the thematic abilities that you can see, the moments where you feel like you're doing something that Green Goblin would do based on the mechanisms. That's what I really like about this. And so why is this on this setup list? Well, it's because I love building those teams. I like putting together a group of heroes or a group of villains that make sense to be together, and then seeing them interact with each other. The setup is the team building and the figuring out which tactics cards to pair. It's the same reason that you might like playing Magic the Gathering. You like the gameplay of Magic the Gathering, but you also like building a commander deck. Like, it's deck building but with toys. And not for nothing, the other part of this that is really fun is setting up the board. You don't set up the miniatures like in the middle, you put them kind of on the edges, but you do build a board of toys and then play with your toys. There are so few opportunities, I feel like, as adults to put toys on a table and then play with them like you did as kids. And this is like, there's more of that structural kind of framework of rules and mechanisms and numbers that are associated with everything, but it has that same kind of spirit as like, I am going to grab a bunch of action figures and put them together and fight them against each other and kind of like crash them into each other. And this game, you have the setup aspect that lets you set up the teams, and then the setup aspect that lets you set up the playmat. This actual like scenario of, yeah, this is like a New York City street, but they also have components for like if you want a Wakanda thing, or, you know, Star Wars Legion, you could have a Hoth map or an Endor map. It's a lot of effort to put all the stuff together, to paint the miniatures, it's a lot of money to buy everything. But if you are willing to pay, you know, for that experience, it really does reawaken that kind of child in me, and I really like that. So the setup of this one, it makes this list because it makes me feel like a kid again. Might not be for everybody. No, it's not a board game, but I put it on the list and I talked about it, so it's going in the video. This is so boring. Guys, how you doing? I'm okay.
I'm kind of sleepy.
Same as when you asked 5 minutes ago. What the hell was that?
Hey, wait, what's this guy doing? He put all the miniatures off, not on the board yet. He didn't finish setting up the game. I finished setting it up as much as I wanted to before we did this together, okay? Give me a break. I'm doing my best. This is Battlelore 2nd Edition, a game from Richard Borg, the designer of the commands and colors system, which you might know from Memoir 44, where there's like the three kind of lanes, the left and right and central. Well, the left and right are flanks. The center is not a flank. You can't be a flank in a middle. That's not how the word works. I don't know what it's called. Zone, And you're drawing cards that say like activate 2 units in the center flank. It's not a flank. And you're like, but I need the rightmost flank. Oh, I'm losing. And it's, simulates kind of the fog of war, the chaos of battle. And it's a great system. Memoir 44, probably the most popular game with this system, but this is my favorite. And genuinely, the reason that it is my favorite is for the setup. Memoir 44, you've got a scenario book where you put out the terrain and you put out the guys on either side based on a set scenario. This game has something different in mind. First, there is an army building kind of component where you can pick from 3 cards in each faction for like pre-made armies, or you can build your own army up to 50 points. But I like doing the card way. It's just a little bit easier, simpler. So you build your own army with those cards, and then you build the board for the scenario. There are different scenario cards for either side, for the Uruks and the Dakan, I think they're called, the blue and the red. It's generic fantasy good and bad guys. But you've got these cards, and they tell you where to put the terrain out and where you can place your units, in addition to some unique either victory conditions or setup rules for yourself, like maybe usually you're not allowed to move around in the water, and this card lets you move around in the water. Whatever it is. It tells you where you can set up your stuff. So that is going to make every game different. You're going to have different armies facing against each other, different scenarios paired up against each other, and finally, different layouts of where you put your army. This little deck of cards is full of all of the units that you've got over here, plus some decoy cards. So based on whatever card you've got in front of you, this scenario, this tells you where you can put your stuff. By the end of setup, you will have a card on each of the little highlighted hexes that shows where your armies are going to be. And when both players have kind of set all that up, you will simultaneously reveal, and it's like, oh my gosh, my River Watch Riders are right there. You weren't expecting that, were you? And you put out the little miniatures on the board based on where the cards are. So in this way, kind of like Wildlands, it takes this setup element of building the board and it makes it a gamified kind of puzzle where you're deciding, where do I want my strongest units? Do I want to focus on the left flank? And maybe it makes it seem like I'm going to be coming in from this side, but oh no, I'm flanking around from behind. I've said flank so many times. I haven't said flank this much in the last 5 years. What's going on? It's basically just like a game within a game. And that's why I like this so much, because you get 2 games out of the deal. In Memoir 44, you've just got the kind of war part of it where you're doing the fighting, you're rolling dice. In this game, there is actual strategy to how you set up your army, which is a big part of any kind of epic battle, is the generals deciding where to allocate their forces, which just makes it a bit more interesting for me. Now, I will say that this game, of all of the ones that I've done like the actual setup for so far for this video, this is like the most fiddly, but I think it adds so much to the game that it's this highly ranked. Like Wildlands is easier to set up and it still gives you that like strategic element. I think this gives you more strategy, more variation, more interesting choices every time you play, that I don't really mind that you gotta go searching for like the right hex tile and like, oh, I was using this for a river over here, but I really should have used it for the building. It's a little finicky. It adds 2 minutes total to like the setup time. Overall, not terrible to set up that aspect of it, and the other parts of setup are so freaking good that it's number 2. It's number 2, and not in the poop way, am I right? And finally, what better game to make this list than one that I can set up right in front of you in a matter of seconds. So we're assuming that this is 2 players kind of setting up simultaneously. Obviously, I already set this up, but imagine that they're setting up as I set up, okay? And that's how long this game takes to set up, all right? Watch this. All right, you gotta take that off. You gotta open this up. You got to take this little player thing out. Take out this deck of cards, take off the top card, shuffle this up a little bit. That's quick. You got this, you got this, you got these dice, and you have these tokens, I am set up. The game is set up. That's how long it took. What did it say on the YouTube time thing on the scrubby bar? What was that, 25 seconds? Yeah, that's how long it takes to set up Dice Throne. This is Marvel Dice Throne, so it's, right now Thor versus Scarlet Witch, but there's also, if you hate Marvel for whatever reason and you love generic characters like the Gunslinger and a Moon Elf, you can play with them. I'm never gonna play with them. Give me Thor any day over some random Moon Elf. Who likes a Moon Elf? Not me. Sorry, that's maybe like, oh man, this guy's prejudiced against Moon Elves. No, it's just like, give me characters that I know, instead of Pumpkin Man. I don't know what the other ones are. Dice Throne is a little fighting game, usually 1v1, but you can play with other player counts. I've only ever played 1v1, and that's kind of where I want this type of game to be. This is kind of like Unmatched, where you've got famous characters either from literature or, archetypes, moon elves, etc. And you fight them against each other. It takes like 30 minutes usually. You whittle down your opponent's health, and once they're at 0, you've won the game. And as you can see, setup-wise, not so much of a burden. Not too tough to do. There not being like a central board does help to keep that setup time down. Unmatched has a central board, so it takes like a couple extra seconds to set up. Also, not being in these little player trays adds a little bit of extra time. Man, this one, it is that 30-minute time frame is the shortest game of any that I've talked about today, but that setup is also the shortest. You're getting a full minute per second of setup. That's kind of bonkers when you think about it compared to what other board games require setup-wise of you. There's nothing that does it this efficiently that I've seen. You might have stuff that you've seen where you're like, 25 seconds? Pfft, that's foolish. You should be taking 8 seconds with this game. I don't know, I was gonna pull one out, but clearly if I had one, it would be on the list. I don't know what it is. Is there one that's better than this for the amount of game that you get? Let me know in the comments below. This is Dice Throne. Let me talk about the game for like 1 second. It's like Yahtzee, kind of. You're rolling these dice trying to get either like 4 of a kind or a straight or a full house. Depending on the character, you'll be going for different things. And you can like combine abilities. Like maybe you're trying to put these little probability manipulations out to get that thing, or I don't remember. It's been a while since I played Scarlet Witch in particular, but there's all kinds of like little abilities that you're accessing through the use of dice. You've also got this deck of cards that lets you do stuff, which, who doesn't like doing stuff? So this is Marvel Dice Throne, the most incredible game to set up and then play.
Blood without wound. Whew. Wound without pain? I really hope so. Guys? Where'd you go? I feel... Whoa.
I feel good.
And that'll about do it for this week's Board and Savior episode. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you haven't yet, subscribe and leave a comment down below with your favorite board game with a great setup. Maybe I haven't played it. I would love to try it. I like setting up board games that are fun to set up, as I learned doing it today. I mean, Neb, I'm Ben. This is totally what's going on. Canon, come on, man. Additionally, links in the description below to another YouTube video from me that went live today. More Board and Savior. What the heck? If you want to see me talk for a couple minutes, you're allowed to. Wow. And also a link to that new Ko-Fi page that I talked about earlier. If you want monthly blog posts, early videos, all kinds of goodies, you are more than welcome to give me your money. And if you just want to support the channel and say, I love it when that guy lays on his basement floor, you can do that too. Whatever you would like to do, or, I'm happy to just have you comment and like here. I love you regardless. So take care, talk to you soon, and goodbye from the basement floor.